Have you ever wondered why a man can walk away from someone who openly disrespects him, only to spend nights thinking about how to win her back? Why rejection from a distant person can feel more intoxicating than affection from someone who genuinely cares? Why the colder she becomes, the harder he works for a place in her heart? The answer is rarely love alone. Sometimes, what appears to be devotion is the wounded ego desperately trying to reverse an old humiliation. A man can become addicted not to a woman, but to the possibility of finally being enough for the person who made him feel insufficient. He may call it loyalty. He may call it patience. He may tell himself that she is complicated, wounded, afraid of intimacy, or simply misunderstood. But beneath all those explanations, a darker psychological mechanism may be operating. The psyche has a strange relationship with unfinished pain. What wounds it also fascinates it. What rejects it can become the object of obsession. What withholds approval can gain a power far greater than it deserves. This is where the shadow begins to reveal itself. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious does not simply contain the parts of the self that are frightening. It also contains everything the conscious personality refuses to acknowledge: the need for approval, the terror of abandonment, the hunger to be chosen, the shame of not feeling valuable enough. A man can build an impressive identity on the surface: disciplined, responsible, successful, calm, rational. He can command a room and still become emotionally powerless in the presence of one person whose affection he cannot secure. Because the shadow does not care about appearances. It waits beneath them, and when the right person appears, it rises. The emotionally unavailable woman can awaken something ancient within him. The boy who learned that love must be earned. The boy who watched approval disappear and concluded that perfection might bring it back. The boy who became hyper-aware of other people's moods because affection once depended upon reading the room correctly. So when she withdraws, he does not simply experience disappointment. His nervous system interprets it as danger. Her silence becomes a question. What did I do wrong? Her distance becomes a challenge. What must he become to make her stay? Her rejection becomes an indictment. Perhaps he was never worthy. This is why some men chase what hurts them. They are not always chasing the person. They are chasing the correction of an old wound. The unconscious mind may believe that if the unavailable person finally chooses him, then the past will be rewritten. The humiliation will be erased. The loneliness will become meaningful. The old feeling of being unseen will finally receive an answer. And this is where projection enters the story. A man may project onto a woman qualities that exist partly within his own unconscious world. She becomes mystery, salvation, validation, danger, beauty, rejection, femininity, and emotional completion, all at once. She becomes larger than a human being. She becomes a symbol. The more symbolic she becomes, the less capable he is of seeing her clearly. He no longer sees the actual relationship. He sees what the relationship represents. This is one of the great traps of the human psyche, confusing intensity with truth. Intensity feels profound because it activates the nervous system. Uncertainty creates anticipation. Inconsistency creates obsession. Intermittent affection can become psychologically powerful because the brain keeps waiting for the next reward. A warm message after 3 days of silence can feel more powerful than 3 months of stable affection. Not because it is more meaningful, because the mind has learned to associate relief with love. And once relief becomes love, peace can begin to feel empty. This is how chaos becomes familiar. A man who has lived too long in emotional uncertainty may distrust the woman who treats him gently. Her consistency may feel strange. Her availability may feel less exciting. Her respect may not produce the same emotional storm. Meanwhile, the woman who withdraws, returns, confuses, seduces, rejects, and repeats the cycle can feel impossible to forget. The nervous system begins calling instability chemistry. The wounded ego calls pursuit commitment. The shadow calls suffering proof of depth. But Stoic philosophy offers a brutal correction. Epictetus taught that human suffering intensifies when the mind tries to control what does not belong to it. Another person's affection does not belong to you. Their attention does not belong to you. Their approval does not belong to you. And yet the wounded man may spend enormous portions of his life trying to control precisely these things. He rewrites messages. He calculates timing. He studies tone. He watches social media. He creates distance to provoke pursuit, then destroys his own dignity by checking whether she noticed. He becomes a strategist in a relationship where there should simply be two human beings meeting each other freely. That is not love. That is psychological captivity, disguised as romantic effort. Seneca warned against allowing the mind to become enslaved to external circumstances. The ancient Stoics understood something modern psychology continues to rediscover. Dependence on external validation creates fragility, because the source of emotional stability has been placed outside the self. The man who needs another person to feel worthy is never truly in a relationship with that person. He is negotiating with a mirror. Every interaction asks the same unconscious question: tell me who I am. That is why rejection can feel catastrophic. The rejection is not merely saying, this relationship is not right. The wounded psyche hears, you are not enough. And suddenly, the man is no longer pursuing a woman. He is arguing with a verdict. But no external person has the authority to issue that verdict. The tragedy is that many people spend years attempting to win love from those who consistently demonstrate that they cannot give it in the form being sought. They call endurance strength. They call self-abandonment devotion. They call obsession passion. And because the pain is emotionally intense, they mistake it for significance. But there comes a moment in every man's life when the illusion can no longer survive. A moment when the question changes. Not, how can this person finally choose me? But, why was being chosen by this person so important that self-respect became negotiable? That question cuts deeper, because it points away from the other person and toward the hidden architecture of the self. And there, beneath the longing, beneath the anger, beneath the endless mental replay, sits the shadow, waiting to be seen, waiting to be understood, waiting for the chase to end. The shadow does not disappear because it is ignored. It becomes stronger. What a man refuses to confront within himself will eventually find a person through whom it can be experienced. This is why certain relationships feel strangely familiar, even when they are destructive. The person may be new. The emotional pattern is not. There is something haunting about discovering that the heart can become loyal to a wound. A man may know, intellectually, that someone is wrong for him. Friends may tell him. Logic may tell him. Even his own sleepless nights may tell him. Still, something pulls him back, because the unconscious is not governed by logic. It seeks completion. Jung called this movement toward psychological wholeness individuation, the gradual process of becoming more fully conscious of the forces shaping the personality. But individuation often begins with discomfort. The persona must crack. The image of strength must become honest enough to admit where fear is hiding. And for many men, the most uncomfortable discovery is this: the person being chased may not be the real source of the pain. The real source may be the part of the self that believes love must be earned through performance. That belief can be extremely subtle. It does not always sound like, I am worthless. Sometimes it sounds like, once she sees how loyal I am, she will change. Once success arrives, she will respect me. Once he becomes more attractive, more disciplined, more masculine, more successful, more emotionally intelligent, the rejection will disappear. The language changes. The wound remains. The man turns himself into a project, designed to win a verdict. And this creates a dangerous psychological bargain. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy, he asks whether he can become valuable enough to make an unhealthy relationship work. That distinction changes everything. A person who has been trained by conditional affection often becomes highly skilled at self-modification. He watches himself constantly. He studies every word. He becomes adaptable, agreeable, useful, impressive. He becomes whatever might preserve connection. But the more he performs, the less he knows where the performance ends and the authentic self begins. This is one of the deepest consequences of attachment to external approval, the gradual disappearance of the self. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly turned attention toward the quality of one's own mind, rather than the opinions of the crowd. The Roman emperor understood that a person can possess power, status, admiration, and still remain internally governed by the judgments of others. The cage does not need bars. Sometimes it is simply the need to be approved of. A man can be financially independent and emotionally dependent. He can command employees while desperately seeking reassurance from one person who withholds it. He can speak confidently in public and become terrified by a message left unanswered. This contradiction is not hypocrisy. It is fragmentation. Different parts of the personality are operating under different laws. The conscious man says, "This relationship is hurting." The wounded boy whispers, "Don't leave." The ego says, "Walk away with dignity." The shadow says, "Make her regret losing you." The rational mind says, "She has shown you who she is." The unconscious says, "Maybe this time it will be different." And the battle continues. Not because the man lacks intelligence, because intelligence alone cannot dissolve an unconscious attachment. The psyche must be made conscious. That requires a kind of honesty most people avoid. A man must eventually ask what exactly he feels when someone withdraws from him. Is it sadness, anger, fear, shame? Or does rejection awaken the unbearable feeling of becoming invisible? That question matters. Because there is a difference between grieving the loss of a person and panicking over what their absence seems to say about one's value. The first is human grief. The second is an identity crisis. And identity crises create desperate behavior. The desperate person reaches. He over-explains. He apologizes for things that were never his responsibility. He accepts crumbs and calls them progress. He lowers standards while convincing himself he is being understanding. He tolerates disrespect because the possibility of losing the relationship feels more terrifying than the reality of losing himself. Eventually, he begins negotiating against his own boundaries. That is the moment self-respect starts leaking away, not dramatically, quietly, one compromise at a time. The psyche is very good at rationalizing whatever it has become emotionally invested in. The man begins collecting evidence for why the relationship might still work. Every small sign of affection becomes proof. Every moment of rejection becomes an exception. He starts living between two realities: the reality of what is happening and the reality he needs to believe is happening. This split creates exhaustion. Because maintaining a fantasy requires constant interpretation. Every message becomes a puzzle. Every silence becomes a theory. Every change in tone becomes a psychological investigation. Love becomes surveillance. Peace disappears. The Stoics understood that freedom begins when perception is separated from fantasy. Epictetus insisted on examining impressions before surrendering judgment to them. Modern psychology might describe the same process differently. Emotional triggers are not always accurate descriptions of present reality. A trigger is an alarm. An alarm is not proof of danger, but the wounded mind treats it as proof. This is why healing requires more than simply saying, "Stop chasing." A person cannot permanently release a pattern he does not understand. The chase must be understood as communication from the unconscious. Something within is saying, "Look here. Look at the part of you that still believes love must be earned. Look at the part that confuses rejection with inadequacy. Look at the part that would rather suffer than face the emptiness that appears when the chase ends." That emptiness frightens many people because once the pursuit stops, there is silence. No message to wait for, no person to impress, no relationship to analyze, no fantasy to maintain. And in that silence, the neglected self begins speaking. This is where many men turn back. They mistake silence for loneliness. But silence is often where identity returns. The nervous system begins to calm. The mind no longer has to calculate. The body no longer waits for the next emotional reward. And slowly, something uncomfortable emerges. He begins to realize that what felt like an impossible love may have been an impossible need. The need for another human being to settle an argument he had been carrying inside himself for years. That argument was never really about them. It was about worth. And worth cannot be negotiated through pursuit. No amount of attention from an unavailable person can permanently heal a person who believes he is fundamentally unworthy. Because the moment their attention disappears, the wound returns. This is why some people move from relationship to relationship, always chasing someone slightly out of reach. The face changes. The pattern remains. The unconscious keeps selecting familiar pain because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar peace. Peace requires trust. Trust requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires the courage to discover that worth does not need to be proven. For the man who has spent years trying to earn love, that realization can feel almost frightening. Because if worth does not need to be earned, then the entire performance can stop. And when the performance stops, the true self has nowhere left to hide. That is where individuation begins. Not with becoming more impressive, with becoming more honest. Not with making someone regret losing you, with becoming incapable of abandoning yourself simply to keep someone else. The deepest transformation occurs when a man finally understands that rejection is not a command to pursue harder. Sometimes rejection is information. Sometimes distance is clarity. Sometimes the person who refuses to recognize your value is not withholding your worth. They are simply revealing their capacity. And those are not the same thing. The moment that distinction becomes real, the chase begins to lose its power. There is a strange freedom that begins the moment a man stops trying to convince another person of his value. At first, it may feel like loss. The hands want to reach for the phone. The mind wants to reopen the conversation. Memory begins editing the past, selecting the moments that were beautiful, and conveniently forgetting the moments that were humiliating. The psyche bargains. Perhaps she was overwhelmed. Perhaps she was afraid. Perhaps he should have been more patient. Perhaps the timing was wrong. Perhaps one more conversation will finally make everything clear. But clarity rarely arrives through another argument with reality. Reality has already spoken. The difficulty is accepting what it said. This is where detachment is often misunderstood. Detachment is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is not becoming incapable of love. It is the refusal to make another person's behavior the judge of one's inner state. The detached man can care deeply without surrendering himself. He can miss someone without chasing them. He can love someone without needing to possess them. He can experience rejection without turning rejection into a definition of his identity. That is strength of a different order. The Stoics did not teach emotional numbness. They taught the disciplined ordering of judgment. Marcus Aurelius could acknowledge grief, betrayal, irritation, desire, and loss, while continually returning to the question that mattered. What belongs to the character, and what belongs to the world? Another person's decision belongs to the world. Your response belongs to character. This distinction seems simple until the heart is involved. Then everything becomes personal. A delayed message feels personal. A cold expression feels personal. Someone choosing another person feels personal. Someone becoming distant feels personal. But not everything that hurts is an insult. And not everything that ends is evidence of inadequacy. Sometimes people leave because they cannot meet the depth being offered. Sometimes they stay only when the relationship serves their own emotional needs. Sometimes they are incapable of reciprocal intimacy. Sometimes they are simply incompatible. Human beings possess the unfortunate habit of making cosmic conclusions from ordinary events. One person does not choose a man, and suddenly the man concludes that he is undesirable. One woman betrays him, and he concludes that women cannot be trusted. One relationship collapses, and he decides that love itself is an illusion. The mind wants one explanation that can organize the pain. But pain does not always contain a grand verdict. Sometimes it contains a boundary, and boundaries are among the clearest forms of psychological truth. The person who repeatedly diminishes you is giving you information. The person who only values you when you withdraw is giving you information. The person who keeps you uncertain while demanding your loyalty is giving you information. The person who makes you feel that affection must be earned through suffering is giving you information. The mature psyche eventually stops asking, "How do I make this person treat me differently?" It asks, "What does their behavior tell me about what this relationship actually is?" That shift is profound, because the first question assumes control over another person. The second assumes responsibility for the self. This is the beginning of sovereignty, not dominance over others, mastery over one's own participation. A man cannot control whether someone respects him, but he can control whether he remains available to disrespect. He cannot control whether someone returns his affection, but he can control whether he keeps offering his heart to a closed door. He cannot force someone to understand his value, but he can stop treating their blindness as evidence that the value does not exist. That is what healing looks like when stripped of romantic fantasy. It is not becoming someone who never hurts. It is becoming someone who no longer needs pain to prove love. And this is where the deeper Jungian transformation occurs. The feminine and masculine images within the psyche can become distorted when projection remains unconscious. A man may encounter a woman and unconsciously place onto her every quality he has repressed within himself: tenderness, emotional depth, sensuality, mystery, vulnerability, even his own capacity for intuition. She appears to possess something essential, something he believes he lacks. So he chases her, not only because he desires her, but because he unconsciously believes that she carries the missing piece of himself. This is projection, and projection creates obsession, because the other person appears larger than reality. She becomes the gateway to a hidden psychological world. But the more conscious the man becomes, the more he retrieves those projected qualities. He discovers that the tenderness he admired in her can exist within him. The mystery he pursued may have been his own unexplored interior. The emotional depth he thought she possessed exclusively may have been a part of himself he had been afraid to access. Suddenly, the obsession weakens, not because she became less interesting, because she became more human. She is no longer a goddess, a judge, a rescuer, or the keeper of his worth. She is simply another person. And that is the moment projection begins to dissolve. What remains may still be love. It may still be attraction. It may still be grief, but it is no longer worship. A man who has retrieved his projections does not need to make another person extraordinary in order to feel alive. He can appreciate beauty without surrendering judgment. He can experience desire without becoming enslaved by it. He can walk away without needing revenge. He can remain without begging. This is what Epictetus meant in another form, when he taught that freedom is found in governing one's own judgments and choices, rather than trying to command what lies beyond one's control. The world can refuse you. The world can misunderstand you. The world can overlook you. None of these events can decide what kind of man you become. That decision remains yours. And perhaps the most painful realization is also the most liberating. The person you were chasing may never have been capable of giving you what you wanted. No perfect sentence would have changed it. No greater accomplishment would have changed it. No improved appearance, better career, more money, more patience, or deeper loyalty would have transformed an unwilling heart into a willing one. That truth can devastate the ego, but it can also release the soul. Because once the fantasy of winning them disappears, something else becomes possible. The pursuit of yourself. Not the polished persona, not the version designed to impress. The neglected self beneath all the performances. The man who knows what he values. The man who can sit alone without feeling abandoned. The man who can love without losing judgment. The man who can walk away without needing the other person to understand why. The man who no longer interprets loneliness as failure. This is not the death of love. It is the death of dependency. And those are very different things. Dependency says, choose me so I can feel worthy. Freedom says, I know what I bring, and your choice cannot erase it. One is hunger, the other is abundance. One chases, the other chooses. There will still be nights when memory returns. There will still be moments when the heart briefly wonders what might have happened. That is human. Healing does not require erasing the past. It requires refusing to build a future inside it. The old wound may knock. The awakened man simply does not give it the keys. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the center of gravity moves. From them, back to him. From approval, back to character. From pursuit, back to purpose. From anxiety, back to peace. What once felt like losing someone begins to look like recovering oneself. And that recovery is more valuable than being chosen by anyone who required you to become smaller to remain near them. Eventually, there comes a morning when the silence no longer feels like punishment. The phone remains untouched. The mind does not immediately search for a message. There is no impulse to prove anything, repair anything, decode anything. And in that quiet, something almost unfamiliar appears. Peace. Not the dramatic peace promised by motivational speeches. A quieter peace. The kind that does not need witnesses. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that arrives when the nervous system finally realizes that it no longer has to fight for belonging. This is the beginning of emotional freedom. But freedom can feel strange to someone who has spent years confusing struggle with meaning. For a long time, the chase may have provided purpose. Every unanswered message created an objective. Every rejection created a problem to solve. Every moment of distance became a reason to become better, more attractive, more successful, more emotionally controlled. The man believed he was pursuing love. In reality, he may have been pursuing relief. And when relief finally comes from within, the entire architecture of the obsession begins to collapse. The mind starts seeing what it refused to see before. The relationship was not necessarily profound because it caused intense pain. The person was not necessarily rare because they were difficult to reach. The connection was not necessarily destined because it was difficult to maintain. Difficulty is not proof of depth. Scarcity is not proof of value. And obsession is not proof of love. These distinctions become visible only after the emotional fog begins to clear. Then the past can be examined without worshiping it. The moments of tenderness can be appreciated without using them to excuse the moments of cruelty. The attraction can be remembered without turning it into destiny. The grief can be honored without turning it into a reason to return. That is maturity. Not pretending the wound never existed, understanding why it existed. Jungian psychology teaches that what remains unconscious tends to repeat itself. The man who refuses to confront his abandonment fears may continue choosing people who trigger them. The man who believes he must earn love may repeatedly become attracted to people who make affection conditional. Not because he consciously wants suffering, because the unconscious often seeks what is familiar before it seeks what is healthy. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. That is why healing sometimes requires learning to tolerate what once felt boring. Consistency, respect, reciprocity, clarity. A healthy relationship may not produce the same adrenaline as emotional uncertainty, There may be no dramatic reunion after silence, no emotional roller coaster, no constant question of whether the other person cares. And the wounded psyche may initially interpret this stability as a lack of chemistry. But chemistry is not always compatibility. Sometimes what feels like extraordinary attraction is simply the nervous system recognizing an old emotional pattern. The mature man learns to distinguish excitement from alignment. He learns that attraction can be strong without being destructive. He learns that love can be peaceful without being shallow. He learns that someone can desire him without keeping him uncertain. And perhaps most importantly, he learns that being wanted is not the same as being valued. Being wanted can be momentary. Being valued is reflected in behavior, in consistency, in respect, in consideration, in the willingness to meet another person in reality, rather than keeping them suspended inside ambiguity. This is where self-worth becomes something deeper than positive thinking. Self-worth is not repeating that everything is fine. It is living in a way that communicates, through action, that one's dignity matters. A man who knows his worth does not need to announce it. His boundaries announce it. His decisions announce it. His willingness to leave announce it. His refusal to bargain against his own values announces it. There is no need to punish the person who rejected him. No need to become cold. No need to become cynical. No need to make the other person suffer so that the ego can feel balanced. That would still leave the center of his life in their hands. True detachment requires something more difficult: indifference to revenge. The person who wounded him no longer needs to regret anything for him to move forward. Their apology is not required. Their admiration is not required. Their return is not required. Their realization is not required. The chapter can close without the other character ever understanding its ending. This is where the wisdom of the Stoics becomes almost radical. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly directed attention toward the shortness of life and the importance of governing one's own character. A life spent waiting for someone else to validate it is a life partially surrendered. Seneca understood that time is not merely something that passes. It is life itself. Every hour spent mentally negotiating for another person's approval is an hour that cannot be recovered. The question eventually becomes brutally simple. How much of life should be sacrificed trying to become enough for someone who has already shown that they do not wish to meet you halfway? There is no noble answer that justifies endless self-abandonment. Love does not require the destruction of dignity. Compassion does not require tolerating contempt. Patience does not require indefinite waiting. And forgiveness does not require renewed access. A person can forgive and still leave. A person can understand someone's wounds and still refuse to become collateral damage inside them. A person can love someone and still decide that the relationship cannot continue. That is not cruelty. That is discernment. And discernment is one of the highest forms of self-respect because it allows the heart to remain open without allowing the mind to become blind. The man who once chased now begins to observe. He watches his own reactions. He notices the urge to prove. He notices the fear of being forgotten. He notices the impulse to return whenever someone becomes distant. And instead of obeying those impulses, he becomes curious about them. What is this trying to protect? What old fear is being awakened? What would happen if this feeling were allowed to exist without being acted upon? These questions create space. And in that space, choice returns. This is the real opposite of obsession. Not indifference, choice. The ability to feel deeply without becoming governed by every feeling. The ability to desire without demanding. The ability to lose without collapsing. The ability to walk away without needing to destroy what was once loved. That is emotional adulthood. And perhaps one day, the man looks back at the person he once chased and realizes something astonishing. The person never held his worth. Only his belief did. The throne belonged to the imagination. The judgment belonged to the wounded ego. The prison door was never locked. He simply believed he had to remain inside until someone outside finally opened it. But no one was coming. That was the liberation. Because the moment he stopped waiting for permission to leave, he discovered that he had always been free. The shadow had been faced. The projection had been retrieved. The wound had been acknowledged. The ego had survived the humiliation of not being chosen. And beneath all of it remained something quieter than pride. Self-respect. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that needs to win. The kind that can stand in an empty room and still know who it is. The kind that no longer asks another human being to complete an unfinished sentence written in childhood. The kind that understands. Some people are lessons. Some are mirrors. Some are seasons. Some are deeply loved and still not meant to stay. And none of them are the author of another person's worth. At the end of the chase, there is no trophy. There is only the self. The self that was neglected while searching for approval. The self that was silenced while trying to preserve connection. The self that waited patiently beneath every performance, every compromise, every desperate attempt to be chosen. And when that self is finally reclaimed, love changes. It becomes an offering instead of a plea, a meeting instead of a pursuit, a choice instead of a dependency. The man no longer asks, "How do I make someone love me?" He asks, "Does this relationship allow both people to remain fully themselves?" That question is the doorway to a different life, a life where affection is welcomed but not worshipped, where rejection hurts but does not define, where solitude is not punishment, where peace is not mistaken for emptiness, where the heart can remain soft without becoming available to every hand that reaches for it. And eventually, the one who once chased approval begins to understand the deepest paradox of self-worth. The moment he stops needing to be chosen is the moment he becomes free to choose, not from fear, not from loneliness, not from the desperate hope that someone will finally prove him valuable, but from clarity, from character, from peace. He no longer needs to convince anyone to stay. He simply pays attention to who stays willingly. He no longer runs after closed doors. He notices which doors open without requiring his dignity as the price of entry. He no longer confuses being rejected with being rejected as a human being. And he no longer asks another person to tell him what he should already know. Worth was never something they could give, and it was never something they could take away. The deepest victory was never getting the person back. It was becoming the person who no longer needs to.